home. We are WNST. Tassel, Baltimore. Baltimore Positive. We are positively the most Baltimore positive place I could possibly think of. Labor Day week is ahead. We are broadcasting from Fadley's at Lexington Market. It is just packed in here. Just all sorts of stuff being sold, but nothing better than a Fadley's crab cake down here. It's all brought to you by the Maryland Lottery, the Gold Rush Sevens doublers. I promised to I'll have the Ravens scratch-offs on the 4th when we reconvene at Coco's in Lauraville. Mark Viviano has promised a non-kayfabe visit with me over in Lauraville. I was over there earlier this week, so air conditioning's back up, air conditioning's running in here, and the Orioles have cooled off a tad bit, but just in time for us to do some football. Look, we're going to have real football here next week, like crazy. Yeah. 9 months of waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. I don't want to say you're more optimistic than I. I mean, I am optimistic they're a playoff team. I don't think if you were to give me $1 and say they're going to be a 1 seed again and play the AFC Championship game here again, I'd say no. I'd say I'd bet against that. I'd put a put on that just based on the numbers and based on how hard it is to do what they did last year. And I think we remember 19, we remember 2006, those big years. They're really hard to repeat if your name's not Brady.
It really is. And, I mean, I don't think there's anything overly pessimistic about feeling that way. I mean, if you thought they were going to go 7-10 and we're going to miss the playoffs, then I'd say, okay, that's kind of out of left field. But injuries and just the expectations. As I was driving down here, in fact, because I knew we were going to talk about the Ravens and kind of looking at this in the big picture, knowing that the preseason's history and all of that, they still have 5 months to go for a potential AFC Championship appearance.
So being healthy today doesn't mean a lot.
So
it means a lot, but not everything.
It does. And obviously, it's such a grind. It's such a grind anyway. But when you are as close as they were last year, when they were as good as they were last year in the regular season, when they were playing as great as they were in December and early January to conclude the regular season, I mean, mentally, that's difficult. You know, we always hear about the Super Bowl hangover or the Super Bowl runner-up hangover. I mean, I think this is definitely one of those scenarios where I'm not making an excuse for them. Let's be clear. If they get off to a bad start or they have a season that does not live up to expectations, it's not an excuse. But I think the psychological aspect of this, frankly, I feel it with fans. It's kind of a weird vibe this year. I think people are excited. I think people are optimistic. I think everyone has expectations this is going to be a playoff team. But to your point,
they all know what happened last year is rare.
Right. And for that to happen now twice in 5 years, it's so tough. And I was thinking back to this. In 19, of course, when they go 14-2, Lamar's MVP, unanimous MVP, has this amazing first full season as a starter. They had, I think, before it was all said and done, 13 guys were named to the Pro Bowl.
And that was the Tennessee loss in the playoffs.
And then keep in mind, the world shut down 2 months later, and you had this 2020 season that was just so bizarre across the board that maybe that served as a distraction in some ways. And look, they made the playoffs, they made it to the divisional round that year, but it was such a strange season, whereas this year, it's normal as it can be in 2024, I suppose. And there's just this vibe with everyone that kind of waiting for January. And that's a tough thing to do because you know how wrong things can go and how difficult it is to navigate a 17-game regular season.
I'm an Oriole fan. I know how wrong things can go.
I mean, exactly.
We're here in June. We're going to the World Series.
And now it feels dicey, right? I mean, it's shaky.
And it happens quickly. And I think the same thing would be true for the Ravens to say, where are they when hopefully the Orioles begin the playoffs, right?
Right.
So where are they after the first quarter? And Billick would always say we divide the season into quarters.
Sure.
And you look and you say, all right, Kansas City, they'll be an underdog. Raiders, they better beat Gardner Minshew here. And then
at Dallas.
And then Buffalo here. And
at Cincinnati after that. And that's the first 5 games. So
3-2, 2-3, 4-1, not 5. If they're 5-0, it's otherworldly, right?
Sure.
I mean, we won't worry about the baseball team because we already won the Super Bowl in October. I don't know where that is, but it's somewhere between 3-2 and 2-3. Probably not 4-1 based on the schedule. If they're 4-1, they're really good too, no matter how they're winning. The baseball team and the injuries, and 2 seasons ago and 3 seasons ago, 2 years ago this week, J.K. Dobbins rips his knee up.
3 years ago.
3 years ago.
Yeah, 21.
Rips his knee up in that D.C. 4th game, crazy. I remember being out in Frederick watching the game on TV, and I'm like, all right, they haven't really played any starters. So they haven't had that's sort of a weird injury to start a season. Maybe Keaton Mitchell or some lingering from last year. They do begin. This is the plan. Eric's got his players out on the field next week. That's all you can ask for, really, right?
Yeah. I mean, they've got a few guys banged up. I mean, I expect Arthur Millette to miss the first month of the season, whether he's on IR or not. I mean, but he's your nickel, but they use 3 different guys at the nickel spot, depending on personnel. So he's not a bona fide starter. I think health-wise, they're in as good a shape as you can expect to be, knowing that, as you mentioned, Keaton Mitchell tore his knee up last December. We knew this. I mean, best case scenario, maybe he's back come November, Thanksgiving.
Well, they weren't going to replace that speed anyway.
Sure. And even with him, I mean, there's unknown. When you have a multi-ligament tear like he did, don't know if he's going to come back full speed ever, let alone when he first comes back. So expectations are tempered there. Part of the reason why he went out and got Derrick Henry as you wanted them to. But this team's healthy, but there's just so much unknown, and that's where it is interesting with the early season schedule, with the offensive line, with the coaching turnover, with just some of the defensive depth pieces that they lost, the pass rush. Even though I think at this time a year ago we were talking about the pass rush and they ended up leading the league in sacks. So at some point in time,
we were worried about it last.
Oh, absolutely.
We've been worried because Owe and the guys they've drafted have not been Terrell Suggs. They have not been. I mean, Matabike's been a difference maker, and part of that's been because of the ensemble effort of all of it. But as far as homegrown pass rushers, we talk about them whiffing on wide receivers. I mean, you have to go back to Matt Judon, and he was a wild project, as was Adelis Thomas, right? I mean, these weren't Terrell Suggs, who was a lottery pick. These are different kinds of players. But finding that pass rush guy has always been about Doomerville, Clowney. It's always been about getting a guy, quite frankly, this time of the year, in some cases, to help you out, to augment things.
Yeah, and look, that could still happen at some point in time. I wouldn't dismiss that. I just looked at their salary cap picture as we're at the end of the conclusion.
But you're not looking at Ajabo as being a guy with 14 sacks this year.
Well, not with 14,
right?
But you're hoping he can be a guy that maybe picks up 5 or 6. You know, if he can be that kind of guy. Okay. If Owe can go from a guy that's been right around 5, 6 to 10, right? We saw this last year. I mean, we talked about the ensemble effort of their pass rush. Yes, Matabike had 13 sacks. Yes, Clowney had 9.5. Van Noy, I think, had 9. Probably going to be a lot to ask of Van Noy to repeat that, a career-high year.
Part of that's a factor how good they all were as an ensemble.
Right, exactly. Right? Yeah. And so much of it is scheme, right? I mean, we see them.
Those are Raven team sacks, not individual sacks.
Exactly.
Right?
So that's where I look at it and say, look, if you're going to ask me to predict whether they're going to lead the league in sacks again, I'm going to say probably not, in the same way that you're not so confident that they're going to be the number 1 seed and the best team in football.
I'll try to convince John Martin the Orioles won't be the leaders in home runs next year, so he has to give so much money away. you know, but it's hard to do anything 2 years in a row. To your point,
I mean, it is.
And Lamar winning the MVP would be another thing. It's hard to do 2 years in a row.
That's why the disappointment is what it is, because they've been in this spot twice in 5 years where they've clearly, I mean, not just by looking at certain metrics here or there, record-wise, point differential, DVOA. I mean, go through the list of any traditional or more analytical measure. They were the best team in football in the regular season last year. Same in 2019 by just about every measure.
And they sort of enter Kansas City next week. And I said this flippantly this week. Well, we were the best team last year, just weren't when you run the ball 3 times at home that week.
Just weren't when it mattered most.
That would be the argument for next Thursday to say the Ravens were the better team. If they would have played the Chiefs 5 times last year, they'd have won 3. Right? I mean, you think that way, or you'd like to believe that in the aftermath, and you think, well, how diminished are the Ravens? And look, this happens when you have a good team, right? And we talked all of February. I mean, in January, it was the coaches getting picked apart. In February, it was players getting picked apart. In March, it's, well, we don't want Zeitler anymore. We don't want Mo.
Sure.
So they picked themselves apart a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And we don't want Patrick Queen anymore, so we'll let somebody else get. I said they were that they were a diminished team. I wrote that. You can go find that on the internet, I'm sure somewhere. You know, as the season begins, maybe I'm all puffed up about who this and that and potential and health more than anything else. Not a diminished team because Mark Andrews is better. He's healthy, right? So they're already a better team to me than they were in January because they have some pieces that they did not have working at 100% last year. But McDonald, Clowney, Queen, Millette, for your purposes, for at least the time being. The whole offensive line.
I was going to say.
The whole offensive line.
We haven't even mentioned that.
So, but I don't know how that offsets against King Henry. And, I don't think Odell Beckham was I don't look at those fringe contributing guys with big reputations in a podcast. We got to figure out whether Marlon Humphrey's that guy or not, whether he's a big reputation guy with a podcast or whether he's still a Pro Bowl caliber player. Ronnie Stanley, we got to figure out whether he is a left tackle. So I think they got a lot of questions.
They do.
And I'd like to think that they're not a diminished team going into this game and they were the best team last. I'll buy into all that.
Right.
And if they played again the next week, they probably would have beaten the Chiefs because they would have been stupid enough to run the ball 3 times. So all that being said, where are the Chiefs in all of this, right? I mean, the Chiefs are going to fly a flag, and Travis Kelce and his girlfriend and Andy Reid, and was he going to come back? Is he going to coach? Mahomes. I don't know. They're the big bad wolf to me. Until I see us go out there and do it, I'm not a believer until 11:25 next Thursday when Lamar's doing the postgame, with Chad Steele standing right behind him, no doubt, doing the postgame and saying he beat standing in Arrowhead Stadium saying I won. When he does that, I'll feel a lot better about them winning the Super Bowl than I will if it's not, because you're going to see them again. And you're going to say, well, they can't. Well, they're going to be sliding downhill if they lose the opener in perception of them and the Chiefs and where that would be in January. And that's something they should not just want to win because they want to be 1-0, but they want to get on top of the perception of that. And what happened here last January, it'll be a little salt in the wounds if they come back 0-1 and have to pound on that for 10 days. And I think that's the treachery of it all. That's what I think. Because they're not going to win the Super Bowl even if they win by 20
Well,
points.
and that's kind of the point that I've been making, right? I mean, yes, I think for an early season psychological boost, I'm not going to sit here and say it means nothing. At the same time, to your point, they go out there and win by 3 touchdowns. And look, what this team did in December against the 49ers, against the Dolphins, against really good teams down the stretch, they didn't just beat them. They beat them badly. So we could see them do that. Look, I'm not going to predict that. I'll save my official prediction for a little bit closer to kickoff on the 5th. But look, the Ravens, we've seen them take it to really good teams in the past. And look, in Kansas City last year, they lost to Detroit on opening night. Now, the Lions ended up being a really good team, but at the time, that was kind of a shock. So you never know what's going to happen in week 1. But that said, it is only just week 1. And as much as I think that would be a nice boost for their confidence and would be a nice jolt of energy early in the season. I think
you forget how demoralizing it is to lose every week in a league. You're too used to the Orioles losing 3 times a week, 4 times. They lose this game Friday, it's going to be
0-1.
It's going to be an oh my, for the fan base here in regard to, so what, Lamar goes 12-4 against the rest of the league. Now we have to go to Kansas City in January. And I'll take my chances, but there'll be a 5-point underdog, and it'll be cold, and it'll be, if you get there, and you have to win more. I just think the league has really set them up with a tough schedule. These first 5 games we're talking about, this is a very difficult time for them, and they can they can be 4-1, and we'd say, well, that's what they're supposed to be. That's what they were. They're on pace to be that. I think it's going to be really hard for them to be 4-1. Really hard for them.
I think it's not impossible, but challenging, sure. I mean, you look at the schedule, and this goes back to the offensive line. And perhaps when you and I are talking about
4-1 means they can go 0-1 and win 4 in a row.
Well, sure. And there's also that. We can think back to look no further than Christmas Day last year. Think back to Christmas Day. Top of the world for the Ravens. Kansas City lost at home to the crummy Raiders that day on 2 defensive touchdowns.
I remember that.
No one in the world.
That was almost like Flacco planking against Denver in the middle of December.
It really was.
Right?
And you're talking about the team that was the defending Super Bowl champ, the team that's in the midst of this dynasty that's only been strengthened since then with another championship. You don't know what's going to happen. And that's why, even with the Orioles recently, we've been talking about their struggles.
They have the ability to turn it on. You can look at Mahomes. You can look at any of Brady's subpar teams, and you still didn't want to see him. Same thing with Manning. You didn't want to see any of those guys that are that good. Nobody wants to see Lamar in January either. You know what I mean? They don't want to play the Ravens. They don't want to play that in January if Lamar gets there. But there is a point for, the Orioles. We don't know. We haven't seen them turn it on. Yeah. The Chiefs are and is in January no matter what they are in December.
Sure.
Based on that. And as I see Astros fans running around here, they don't have many of those players left. But there is a DNA of playing in 7 ALCSs in a row, right? There's a DNA about the Atlanta Braves of that era. And the Ravens right now, their DNA is they lose games in January
Yeah.
and Patrick Mahomes wins them.
Right.
And they better change that.
So that's kind of been my point in terms of not making too much of this Week 1 game, and that's why I'm more focused on elements of this team. You know, we mentioned the offensive line. We've talked about the offensive line a lot, and
are they the reason they win or lose next Thursday? Right.
Well, but it's not just next Thursday. It's like, okay, how does it look next Thursday? How does that look in Week 2? How does that look in Week 4? How does that look come Week 9? I mean, we've seen countless examples where. Whether it's the O-line or some unit of a football team, in Week 1 it looks very different come even Week 4. Think back to 19, the year that we were talking about a few minutes ago. I mean, they started that year with Patrick Owasso and Kenny Young as their inside linebackers because C.J. Mosley's gone, and they're saying, hey, we got these young guys. Well, before you know it, before it was even Columbus Day, Josh Bynes and L.J. Fort were suddenly playing linebacker for them.
Signing Steelers to save their ass.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. So, I mean, you really don't know. And that's where we look at this early season schedule. And, yes, there's so much focus on Kansas City from a season opening game, NBC.
Let me be a hype man for that.
No, it's fine.
It's a great hype.
No, of course it is. But they better have their offensive line ready to play that night because you're going up against Chris Jones and the rest of that Kansas City front.
Do you think they believe – and Joe D'Alessandro's not a small part of this, by the way,
question.
Right? So,
No question.
I mean, of all the places in the team where is John Harbaugh going to bed tonight feeling good about his offensive line?
Feeling good about it in Week 1? Maybe not. I do think there's conviction that this group is going to get better over the course of the year because you're talking about a guy in Andrew Voorhees who, yes, was a 7th-round pick last year out of circumstance. He was expected to be more of a 3rd or 4th-round pick. You know, he's going to be a day 2 kind of guy or very early day 3 instead of being 7th-rounder before tearing his ACL at the Combine. You have Roger Rosengard, 2nd-round pick. Now, as much as generally I don't view 2nd-round picks as great bets to start at the beginning of a season as a rookie, it feels more and more like it's trending that way.
Will you feel like practice later in the week that you'll get a look at what it looks like to know he'll be starting or not? Because I would think right now, if you and I had a bet a crab cake here at Fadley's, you'd say, you would give me something and say, they probably won't start him because he's a rookie. But I don't know that holds up. I don't know.
Yeah.
Because we haven't seen anything on the field as fans in these preseason games to give us any clue as to what's really happening.
And we know, and we did see this in the preseason games because other than Stanley and Linderbaum, they have been playing the guys that are going to be lining up. You know, their other 3 starters have played, assuming they're not acquiring someone, which I guess is always possible when you're talking about where their O-line is right now. But I could see a scenario where McCary and Rosengarten rotate in the way that we saw McCary and Ronnie Stanley rotating late last year, when we saw Faalele rotating with Morgan Moses late last year. Could I see that scenario? Because then that gives a nod to Patrick McCary, who, by the way, is in a contract year. And I think part of this is they want to show proper respect to him, and I think he wants to show he can be a starter. Now, I still think his best role, and I still think his ultimate role for this team, barring injury or barring Rosengarten falling on his face completely, is McCary being that 6th guy still. And look, that's still valuable. And I think one of the best things they could probably do from a roster building standpoint would be getting a respectable extension done with him sooner than later. Working under the understanding that Ronnie Stanley's probably not going to play 17 games, just knowing how his career has gone. And Rosengarten might struggle, or McCary might need to play center because Linderbaum gets hurt or whatever. So to me, he's such a valuable part of what they do. So I could see, almost out of deferring to him, out of reverence for him, out of respect to him, and also giving your rookie right tackle a little bit of cover if things are rough for him early on, and then you can just lean a little more with McCary while you're still rotating. I could see that scenario, but point I'm trying to make is I think much sooner rather than later, based on what we've seen in camp, based on how he's performed, which I think of their 3 guys that are vying for starting jobs right now, Voorhees, Faalele at right guard, and Rosengarten at right tackle, I may feel the best about his upside potential, out of those 3 guys. And maybe that makes sense because he's a 2nd-round pick compared to those guys being more, mid-round type guys, a health issue for Voorhees aside a year ago. But I just think there's a lot of unknown when you're talking about these young guys going into a hostile environment like Kansas City, like Arlington a couple weeks later.
One
to
thing
face
I know,
the
they're not going to
Cowboys.
run the ball 3 times next Thursday night. They're going to run the ball more than that.
Sure. There's no question.
For the offensive line will be graded as such. Are we in 2nd and 2 all day long, like you are in 2000 in the good years, or is this a struggle? And where do we find Derrick Henry at this point in his career? Not on week 1. We won't judge. He'll be fine next week.
Yeah.
You judge him on week 13 when you've used him up. And
January, mid-January.
Well,
because that's when you actually.
But where are you later in the year when you're getting beaten up? And how much will they treat him with some kid gloves when they're paying him to be a bulldozer?
Right.
I mean, you've talked about that, and we talked about Buck Showalter riding Matt Wieters to death. Let the Titans worry about Derrick Henry's tread. We need him to run. We need him to win.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what's interesting with that acquisition and how it's going to play out is finding that sweet spot. He's going to carry the ball more than Gus Edwards did last year. I assume he's going to carry the ball at least a little bit more than Mark Ingram did 5 years ago, right? So where's the sweet spot? I mean, even
that means Lamar carries it less.
Well,
maybe not.
They still carry the ball a lot. I'm telling.
Well, I did feel like Monken was going to have design runs the way Greg Roman loved to run the the wishbone and run the Navy offense and have throw his quarterback into that because his quarterback liked it and nobody seemed to mind it until he got hurt. And then all of a sudden.
Didn't get hurt running the ball.
I got it. But when your quarterback gets hurt, it's over. So, nonetheless, keep going.
Okay.
You and I are going to fight to the end of time.
They're
going to be putting Lamar in the Hall of Fame. You're going to be giving his Hall of Fame speech, and you'll.
He's going to be in the Hall of Fame most likely. He's a 2-time MVP.
I got it.
I'm just saying, look at the list of 2-time MVPs. Anyway, I think, first of all, you need to look at what type of runs he was, what his carries looked like last year. They weren't designed runs for the most part. They were scrambles. And look, that's still going to be a big part of what they do because
most effective scrambler in the history of sport.
Their offensive line and whether they're going to be able to pass protect in 5-man protections, which was an issue last year. And 2, Zay Flowers aside, there's still questions about this wide receiver group. I mean, is Rashad Bateman going to take the step forward? Is Nelson Aguilar going to be as dependable as he was last year as a number 3 receiver who was solid
and
but
by the way, when all that
unspectacular?
happens and protection happens, he can throw the ball and he didn't have to run the ball.
Oh, absolutely. Or if a team's going to devote all their
or if they're
attention
losing 21 to 10 in the fourth quarter, he's going to try to go to the phone booth, and that's what's going to happen because that's what he knows how to do.
That's part of what makes him great. That's why, when you say you want him to run less, I think it's nuts. Again, I'm not saying 22 times a game.
15 years and he finally thinks I'm nuts. I mean, I think
when it comes to that, you are. Because that's what makes him special. If you wanted him to play like Tom Brady,
I don't.
Right, and I'm not saying you do, but the point is that's what makes him special. But part of this is also their running backs carry the ball plenty over the last 5 or 6 years. It's not just Lamar. It's not like Lamar's carried it like Derrick Henry workload. It's never been anything close to that.
All the running backs have been hurt. They haven't had a running back have been hurt since Ingram.
But the point is, it's been way more of a, for the most part, I mean, even Ingram, Gus Edwards carried the ball a lot that year still. In 20, it was Dobbins and Gus Edwards, and Ingram got hurt and was an afterthought by the end of the year. 21, that was the year everyone was hurt, right? So, that's not the best example.
Murray.
But 22, you had Gus Edwards, you had Kenyon Drake, you had J.K. Dobbins back and then wasn't quite right and then came back late in the year. There are a lot of running back carries to go around if you want to do more of a timeshare. My point is, it's not going to be as much of a timeshare this year. I mean, Derrick Henry, he had 280 carries last year, and that was on the light side. I mean, year before that, 349. Last healthy season before that, 378. That was his 2,000-yard season. He's not going to carry anywhere close to that. I think we all would agree with that. He shouldn't carry that much because, again, this is all about how he looks in December and January.
But who does?
But he's going to carry it. I'd say 280 was last year. 200 was right around what Gus Edwards was last year. I'm thinking he's going to be 250.
Well, let's be honest. When the Ravens are doing this right, they're running less plays than most other teams. They're having less possessions. They're eating the clock. They're 7 plays down the field kind of thing. And it's chuck. It's chunk passes, not King Henry for 5 yards, 2nd and 5. King
Sure.
Henry for 3 yards, 3rd and 2.
Yeah, you don't want that.
Like that's. But that was the Titans. That was what he was in.
That's
forever.
why the Titans were really mediocre as a team for the most part.
I
right?
remember the Titans back when they were the Oilers. So
Hey,
yes,
but you know, so there are plenty of carries to running backs to go around. Justice Hill, I think, is going to have a similar workload that he had last year. And look, he's good. Like I'm fine with him as your number 2. But Derrick Henry is going to be a much more robust number 1 back than the Ravens have had in a long time. You probably go back to maybe Ray Rice. It's not going to look the same way.
Let's see how effective that is in ball control.
Sure.
Theoretically, on the ground, they should be eating up more clock, right?
But they're still going to throw the ball. I mean, this is the one point I tried to make to you and to so many people about the AFC Championship game, and everyone going nuts about the fact that the running backs carried the ball 6 times. Go back and look. There are analytics websites out there that track this stuff. I want to say, when you look at early down, game neutral situations, so what that basically means is early downs and the game is close. I think it's within 7 points one way or the other. They had the 6th highest pass rate in the NFL in those situations. Point is, they ran the ball as much as they did.
Well, you don't
in
become
part
an MVP without throwing it.
Because they right.
Yeah.
Because they carried it as much as they did in the second half of games, because they were just beating the you-know-what out of most teams. So part of that, what happened in that championship game was, they lost the script, especially understanding what Kansas City's weakness was. But that was also, they didn't stay on schedule. They weren't picking up yardage on first down, and they really.
Well, that is my point. So if you're in 1st and 10 and you get 5, and now it's 2nd and 5, and now you get 3, it's 3rd and 2, incomplete, you're off the field.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So incomplete, you're off the field. That's really where it's at.
Yeah. So
1st and 10, incomplete. Now you're in 2nd and 10. So the incompletions really feed into the problem.
Sure.
And they can't have that.
Sure. And that was the thing. I mean, look, I'll blame the coaching. Lamar Jackson didn't play well in that game. Their defense gave up 2 touchdowns right off the bat, right? I mean, that wasn't part of the formula for how they won all year. And look, in their totality, the defense played well, but they didn't play well early on in that game. They gave up a field goal right at the end of the first half that made it a 2-score game going into intermission. So there are lots of things that didn't go well in that game. The coaching and the number of carries for the running backs that stuck out like a sore thumb, and I get it, but.
Well, there's a lot to prove for a lot. And this is where I'll drag Harbaugh's paranoia into all this. But, it sort of effed up the AFC Championship game years ago. They had a 20-point lead in the Super Bowl, and it came down to 4 plays on the goal line. And then they ran the ball 3 times against Patrick Mahomes. He better get back up the mountain. Like the way Buck Showalter left Zach Britton sitting there in Toronto years ago and never, I would say, recovered from that. The team, the franchise wasn't it. But he didn't get another chance.
Right.
And we're just all, look at Lamar. He's great. He's going to Hall of Fame. There'll be more chances. All right, well, go beat Kansas City the opening night if you want to have that chance to be hosting that game at home, because that's going to be a part of that. And it's out of the gate. It's a tough game. Mm-hmm. This is a diminished team we're seeing here on the road on a tough night in a place that he hasn't won. I'm talking about Lamar, and all of them haven't won collectively. This would be It would be a great win to have. I mean, it'd be a great win to have.
Absolutely.
That's all I can say. And it's really a tough schedule, I think, for the Ravens. It's a tough beginning of the schedule for them to get the kind of traction you want to have with the offensive line they have and the expectations on top of all that they should be 4-1 in October. They might not be. It might be a little more tough than that at the beginning of the year.
It could be a little hairy early in the season. I mean, the O-line, you have a first-time defensive coordinator. Hey, Mike McDonald's, the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. 2 years ago, right around this time, he was getting ready to be a defensive coordinator for the first time in the NFL. And we saw how those first 3, 4, 5, 6 games went. Statistically, that defense was not very good early in the season. Now, Roquan Smith came midway through the year. They were already trending in a good direction by then anyway. But the point is, there were some growing pains there. That's why I said with this offensive line, no, I don't think John Harbaugh, if he's being honest, probably doesn't feel great about where the offensive line is today and heading into the season opener. But I do think there's some conviction and some confidence that those guys are going to grow. And when you have young guys, there's the thought that they have a higher ceiling rather than having older players like a Kevin Zeitler, like a Morgan Moses, like Ronnie Stanley right now, where there's a question.
Where they were with Calais Campbell last year. They don't
always
mind
ask,
doing that.
But because you don't know. Okay, you don't know if you're going to get the same thing. And this is where I would disagree with your description of them being a diminished team. They're a different team. And that's part of the challenge of the NFL or any sport. As much as you want to hold on to what happened last year and just fast forward and get back to the AFC Championship game, you've got 5 months.
It's hard to get better from that. You can only go backwards.
It's different. I mean, but it's not even that. They could be better from the standpoint of being more have that metal to be ready to get over the hump in January, but they might go through some stuff over the course of this year to get to that point.
Well, they're going to go through stuff because it's a season.
So that's where I think there's a challenge, because you can even run it back, right? You hear teams say this: we want to run it back, and they can bring back as much as their personnel as they can possibly do. Same with the coaching staff. They might even look better on paper. Doesn't always play out that way. So I think that's where the challenge is in not thinking about them in terms of diminished or comparing themselves to last year and say, hey, let's go out and exercise the demons in week 1. Again, September football is not the same as January, and we all understand that. But so much of this is just it's a different team. They are very different in certain areas of this football team. And look, it's proven out now over 5 or 6 years. If you have a healthy number 8 at quarterback, you're going to win a lot of games. That's just been the case. They've done that every year, whether they've been the best in the league or whether they've been wild card or just a division winner, whatever. If Lamar Jackson stays healthy, I fully expect them to be there because that's what history has told us now for 5 or 6 years. But at the same time, they've got questions to answer. And when you are talking about some of the new moving parts that they have and some of the pieces that have changed on the coaching side or on the personnel side, look, there's a potential for certain areas to be better than they were last year. But there's also the potential for other things to drop off. And you don't know if you're going to be as healthy as they mostly were last year. Keaton Mitchell aside, and Stanley was banged up, but it was even a healthier season for his standards. So, and he's a year older. So there are a lot of questions. But that said, other than Kansas City, and I agree with you, I mean, they were the team to beat last year, even when people were trying to bury them back in December on Christmas Day, as we mentioned a few minutes ago. Until someone breaks through and beats them, Lamar's in the same boat as Josh Allen in Buffalo. And, okay, I get it. Joe Burrow in Cincinnati beat them once, but they didn't finish the job in the Super Bowl, so they're still chasing. They're still chasing. That's the standard. They're the new Patriots. If that wasn't abundantly clear before, it certainly was when they did it again last January and February. But if you're the Ravens, you do have to turn the page. And that's where I said that it's such a strange year. I mean, even by their own admission, players were talking about this during OTAs and minicamp. And for the most part, they put it to bed at that point, at least in what they were saying. But these guys had a really tough time getting over that. And this fan base still hasn't gotten over it. And I think there's excitement because there's a new season and it's football and the NFL is king in this town and in this country. But there is – I sense a greater urgency as far as January. and yeah, you're going to enjoy it and go to games and get together with your friends and do all the things you do as your rituals on Sundays. But I think there's very much I think there's a feeling of everything that happens between now and then only matters so much, and that's a tough place to be because of what we just said, because it is a new year.
Well, the Orioles are getting there. I mean, and it happens quickly.
It's tough.
Expectations. I expect a delicious crab cake, and I know I can expect that because I'm down here at Fadley's. All are brought to you by the Maryland Lottery. We have the Gold Rush 7s doublers to give away. We're going to have the Raven scratch-offs. Our friends at Liberty Pure Solutions are putting us out on this crazy oyster tour beginning on the 5th of September, which is also the day the season begins. We will be back here at Fadley's on the 23rd of next month eating, I don't know what kind of oyster she's going to make me. She's got a million oysters here. Luke's going to be covering football, baseball, up late with the Dodgers all week and on the road and getting ready to go on the road to Kansas City next week. You can find him at Baltimore Luke. Also, our friends at Jiffy Lube Multi-Care powering us up. Make sure we get out there and get the oil change. I have my little lights on in my car right now, so I got to get over to Jiffy Lube, make sure that I get myself serviced up. We're going to get serviced up with some proper shrimp salad down here and a crab cake. We are at Fadley's. He's Luke. I'm Nestor. Stay with us. We're BaltimorePositive.com.